Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God.
Okay, I have just a couple of things to say, and let me begin by reading from the Apostle Peter, First Peter chapter 2. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put silence to the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. The Apostle Paul wrote that in 63-64 AD. Emperor Nero was the emperor then. You remember Nutball Nero? Let me tell you a couple of things that he did that gave him the name Nutball. He murdered his own mother after several attempts to kill her. He finally sent soldiers to kill her. He murdered at least one, probably two or three of his wives. He killed his half-brother and other political rivals. The old saying that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. He accused Christians of the Great Rome Fire, knowing that they weren't guilty. He just accused them of it anyway. He was also seen to be happy and dancing while the city was burning down all around him. He orchestrated and participated in abusive sex orgies that would make even Hugh Hefner and all the rest blush. He orchestrated the mass arrest and the automatic guilty plea of Christians to appease the gods. So today, when the United States saw a new president inaugurated, Peter's words to us, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put silence to the ignorance of foolish people. Those words are still true today. Peter told his first century readers that they were to be subject to the crazy, sex-driven multi-murderer who was more concerned about his own political power and his own political position than he was to care for the people that he was supposed to lead. I don't care whether you support President Biden or not. I care about you being obedient to God and being a good follower of Jesus. God told Peter in the early church through God took Peter in the early church through several evil emperors and a very evil empire. And yet the church grew exponentially. We're working our way through Acts, and we've seen 3,000, 2,000, etc. added in a day. And that's just the beginning. I don't know what God's going to do in 2021. I don't know what he's going to do in the next 4 years. I don't know what he has planned, but I know that he alone is in control. As I've reminded you many times, the sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision of the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of men. Don't fear. Simply trust God and ultimately everything will be fine. Even if he kills us, as he did Peter, that will be okay. So, no more anxiety, no more concern. God is in control. We are not. Okay?
Amen.
Okay.
Good preaching.
Now, one more thing. I know that some of you have been talking about the vaccine and not getting it because of ethical considerations for embryonic stem cells and all of that other stuff. One of the I forget where he is now. Anyway, one of the people involved in the development of both vaccines gave testimony today to a church group, National Association of Evangelicals, and he said that there are no stem cells used in either of these vaccines that have been approved. The only thing the stem cells were used for, and these were stem cells from abortions in the 60s and 70s in Sweden, not from recent abortions. Those stem cells had been harvested 50 plus years ago. That line of stem cells was used to test the efficacy of the vaccine delivery system. There are no aborted stem cells in the vaccines. As far as I can tell, every Christian biological ethicist that I can find finds no problem with these stem cells. Or, I'm sorry, with these vaccines. There is nothing in it that we can see that would bring a Christian to have to say, I'm going to follow God and not what's going on in the scientific community. So I know for some that was an issue, but according to one of the guys that was involved in development of these, there are no aborted stem cells in these vaccines. Okay, any questions?
Yes.
Who said yes?
If God gave us, or not us, but the doctors, the knowledge to be able to do this kind of stuff, wouldn't it be kind of stupid to not do it, considering he gave them the knowledge to be able to produce these things?
Well, that argument is not a great argument, because God gave us the knowledge to do a lot of things, many things that are sinful. And so the criteria shouldn't be whether or not we have knowledge, because ultimately all knowledge comes from God. The criteria needs to be, does it somehow contort Scripture, or does it somehow cause us to sin? I believe that if the vaccines were made with recently aborted cells, or a tissue from recently aborted babies for the purpose of this vaccine, then yeah, I would say that would be a sin and I wouldn't participate. But that's not the case. That's not at all what happened here. And no additional cells were destroyed. These are lines of cells that have been developed from the aborted cells 70 years ago. Or 60 years, whatever the number is. We're not going to put those cells back. We're not going to be able to do anything to reverse those abortions in Sweden in the 60s and 70s. So the argument needs to be, does God say we should do this or not? God doesn't necessarily speak on it, but he tells us we can't kill babies. And so babies weren't killed in the making of this vaccine, much to the chagrin of many evangelicals who say, no, babies were killed to produce this vaccine. That's not true.
Okay.
Other questions? Comments?
I will let you know that if you are allergic to iodine or if you're on heavy oxygen, they will not give you the vaccine. You cannot be allergic to iodine or be
Yeah,
on heavy
and that is because of the potential danger of the reaction. A lot of people are afraid of getting vaccines because of the threat of whatever the preservatives are in the vaccines. Well, these vaccines don't have those preservatives. That's why you got to keep it at 70 below zero. These vaccines are not like most vaccines that we have seen in the past. And so my recommendation is, if you have it available to you, get a little tiny hole in your arm and let them shoot you with it. It is fine. You're not showing a distrust in God. You're not showing a dependence on man or anything like that. You are using the tools God has given us.
Well, at least in Rogers, the chances of finding the serum at this point is slim to none. So,
well, it's that way everywhere, because there's 360 million people in the United States, and the vaccine can only be produced at such a rate, and it has to be distributed in all 50 states and all the territories, and 197 other countries, and so it takes. Unlike what the new president said, that he's going to have 100 million people vaccinated by the end of January, well, he's just cuckoo, because there's not that much vaccine available. There's not enough needles available. There's not enough nurses to stick it in your arm. So everybody needs to just take a breath. And when the phone line opens up where you can register, 34,000 a second, we're calling here in Fort Myers. Just take a breath.
Well, I will say, if your primary care physician is part of the Lee Health system, Lee Health, at least last week, had vaccine. I was offered a vaccine, and I have an appointment for one next week.
Yeah, it will get there. Just we've been months and months now with this virus going around without a vaccine, and it will get here. But 34,000 a second.
that's a lot.
Yeah, that's just in Lee County. Just imagine what it was like when you do the whole state or the whole country.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to just relax. Okay. Any questions or comments on where we're reading, or what we have been reading and listening to in our daily reading? I'm so glad we're out of Job finally and back into Genesis, because I really like Genesis.
Rich,
Yes.
when Absalom usurped the throne from David, why did David not make an effort to fight back? He ran to the other side of the Jordan and on into the wilderness.
I don't know. Off the top of my head, I would say because he knew he didn't have the numbers right then.
Okay.
But I don't know.
He left one of his advisors there to advise Absalom. And when Absalom didn't take the advisor's advice, the advisor hung himself. So to me, that's just a whole real confusing little circle there.
Yeah. It's been a
That's
while
what I
since
would read.
it's been a while since we've read through that, and I don't remember off the top of my head.
It just was confusing to me.
I've slept a few
the
minutes
story's
since the last time I read it.
Yeah, the story's straightforward. I can't figure out the behind the scenes like sometimes we can.
I don't know. I'll make a note. But the next couple of weeks are going to be super busy for me.
I believe it.
Have some more Fellowship Council meeting tomorrow. And then next week we have all day Thursday and all day Friday on Zoom. I'm just gonna die on Zoom next week for our Fellowship Council
Don't do
meetings.
it that way.
And then Tuesday night is our regular Ham Radio Club meeting, and we're going to do it at the church building, and do a hybrid where some people will come in for the meeting, but others will join us on Zoom, kind of like we're doing like the ladies do it, or like I did last week. And so we'll see how that works. And then Thursday night, I have another exam session up there for ham radio tests, and so a lot of setup, tear down, setup. And so next week's going to be like unbelievably busy. So David and Absalom.
And don't worry about it. You'll get there eventually, and then you can answer me.
Yeah, but then I won't remember that I was supposed to look at it.
Me too. Me too.
Any
What
other
just
questions?
puzzles me? Maybe it's just because he loved his son.
I don't know. Okay, let's get started in Ezekiel then, and we're just going to regress just a little bit, get back to the beginning of chapter 4 of Ezekiel, the siege of Jerusalem. And Ezekiel experiences a prophetic dramatization, and I think this dramatization is kind of cool. Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 1, "And you, son of man, take a brick and lay it before you, and engrave on it a city, even Jerusalem." We saw last week that the brick is not a red clay brick like you'd build a house out of, but rather a clay tablet. And Ezekiel was to draw on the clay tablet, easy for me to say, the design of Jerusalem. And put siege works against it, and build up a siege wall against it, and cast up the mound against it, set camps also against it, and plant battering rams against it all around. So Ezekiel's supposed to draw Jerusalem, and then he's supposed to draw hills coming up to it, and it was siege ramps so that they can get over the top of the wall of the fortifications. And take an iron griddle and place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and set your face toward it, and let it be in a state of siege, and press the siege against it, a sign for the house of Israel. So Ezekiel was then to simulate the futility of the cries of the people of Jerusalem by placing an iron plate in front of the clay as an iron wall. When you go to some of the minor prophets that were writing during that time, Ezekiel gives this picture of of what it was like inside Jerusalem at that period of time when they were under siege, when Nebuchadnezzar had surrounded the city. They couldn't get out of the city. Fortunately, they had water, but they began to run out of food, and they began to eat their kids. And so how do you decide, which kid you eat?
The one you don't love as much?
Since you only have one, you can say that. But
Yeah.
once you have two, I wonder how you'll answer that. I kind of know how your wife's going to answer it, because now you're black
I'm
and blue.
getting beat over here, so
Well, you deserve to be beat.
I would not be able to decide.
No, I mean it's kind of like what we read this morning, or maybe it was yesterday morning. It's a blur. When Abraham was told to offer up Isaac. How do you do that? Here you get this kid after years and years and years, when you're well past the time to really get the kid, and God says, well, offer him up as a sacrifice. I maybe I could offer Brian up, but I couldn't offer Kate up. See, that's how it will. That's how it will feel to the other kid, Brian. And so it doesn't make any sense.
I can't imagine that Abraham even could figure out why would God ask me that, because that's not in God's character.
Well, because he knew God would do something. What did he tell Isaac when Isaac said, "Hey, Dad,
Dad.
where's the lamb?" Well, God will provide
God will
the lamb.
provide.
So he knew he knew he wasn't going to kill him, or if he did kill him, that the end result would be he would resurrect him.
Yeah, it's a test.
It was a test, yeah, absolutely. But who was it a test for?
For the one that was told to kill the son. or the
Well,
child.
That would be Abraham, but was it to
Yeah.
prove something to Abraham, or it's for God to know?
It
Oh,
was
it's for
well,
Abraham.
God already knew though.
Right, God already knew. It was for Abraham to know.
Faith, yeah. His trust, Abraham's trust.
Right.
Mhm. Oof.
So verse 3 then closes with a statement that this picture of Jerusalem under siege, separated by an iron pan, is a sign to the house of Israel. And again, house of Israel here is not just the 10 northern tribes. It is all of Judaism. It's the 12 tribes scattered abroad in captivity and some remaining in Israel. God was telling Ezekiel to draw out the separation between the people of Israel and God. Make it such that they feel the pain of what they put God through. Remember, they had a covenant. They had renewed the covenant over and over and over again. And they said, we'll be your people. You'll be our God. You'll take care of us. We'll follow you. And then they never followed. And so God said, look, make sure they see this wall of separation between us. Make sure they feel that I am not going to care for them right now. It's clear God wanted Ezekiel to demonstrate the result of the people's sin was the separation from God. That's what sin always does. It separates us. Okay, on to new territory now. The siege results from iniquity. Chapter 4, verses 4 through 8. Then lie on your left side and place the punishment of the house of Israel upon it. For the number of days that you lie on it, you shall bear their punishment. For I assign to you a number of days, 390 days, equal to a number of the years of their punishment. So long shall you bear the punishment of the house of Israel. And when you have completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and bear the punishment of the house of Judah. 40 days I assign you, a day for each year. And you shall set your face toward Jerusalem, toward the siege of Jerusalem, with your arm bared, and you shall prophesy against the city. And behold, I will place cords upon you, so that you cannot turn from one side to the other, till you have completed the days of your siege. I think at this time, if I were Ezekiel, I'm putting my hand up and saying, God, I quit. I don't want to do this.
I really hope God miraculously took care of his sin. Otherwise, those would be some hefty bed sores.
Ooh, buddy. These verses provide the reader another glimpse into the punishment of Israel. But these verses are also some of the most difficult to interpret accurately. The original language of the text is somewhat ambiguous due to some textual issues we have. In the previous 3 verses, Ezekiel represented God. Here in these verses, Ezekiel represents the people of Israel. God tells Ezekiel to lay on his left side with his head toward the drawing of Jerusalem for 390 days. We know from other verses in this section that Ezekiel was bound, as we see in verse 8. He was to eat little food. Verses 9 through 17, or he eats a little food, we see in verses 9 through 17, and only for a portion of each day, verse 10, was he allowed to get up. He was to lay on his left side for 390 days, and on his right side for 40 days. While the text doesn't specify what punishment is in view, some believe that the 390 days represent the 390 years of Egyptian captivity, and the 40 years represent the 40 years of wilderness wandering. Others believe that since Ezekiel's ministry is focused on Jerusalem, that 390 years began with Solomon's son Rehoboam in 931 and concludes with the return from captivity in Babylon in 538 BC, about 393 years. So what I'm saying is we don't know what the 390 years represents specifically. We can't tell necessarily in the text. What is God referring to? I don't view the first one as necessarily being a legitimate response because it was simulating punishment, and I'm not sure that's what the time in Egypt was.
Well, they didn't go there originally for punishment.
Well, they weren't a people when they went there.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
So that interpretation seems to be strained for me. But I don't know that the numbers work out necessarily either, that it is, why all of a sudden after Solomon's son, or after Solomon, starting with his son, other than it was the division, after Solomon comes the divided monarchy. That's the only thing I can argue, that it was the divided monarchy, but that's not a convincing argument as far as I know. So I'm just going to leave it as God was demonstrating punishment, but for what specific sin, I can't argue. What seems to be clear is that God had been patient with Israel, allowing for years of rebellion. I mean, they started rebelling 5 seconds after they left Egypt, right? I mean, the golden calf is between Egypt and the Red Sea. It wasn't like it was well into their trip. It was at the beginning of their trip. So they were rebelling the whole time, and so I don't know specifically what God is punishing them for here, other than the rebellion. God demonstrated extreme patience with Israel, but was obligated to keep the conditions of the covenant. See, we often think of the covenant in just a positive manner. The covenant also had negative portions to it. If you're good, you get to stay in the land. If you're not, you get out of the land. So God was obligated to do both. He couldn't just give them the good and not be willing to give them the bad. He was obligated to do it. His character demanded it. Israel didn't think God would do it. And then after the 10 northern tribes were taken, Judah thought, God's really not going to do it to us because we're really the chosen.
But the thing is that most people don't realize is it all stems to we're God's children. And sometimes you got to give your kid a smack on the butt. And,
yep.
I mean, that's kind of the equivalent of it.
Yeah, it is. God was obligated to do that, just like parents are obligated to do that for us. In this pericope, he was delivering the message that they were in this situation because of their sin. This was not God being mean. This was God being just. This was God doing what he told them that he would do. And so we need to remember that God was doing what he said he would do. Any questions on that? Okay, let's move on to verse 9 then in chapter 4. And you take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and emmer, and put them in a single vessel, and make your bread from them. During the number of days that you lie on your side, 390 days, you shall eat it. God tells Ezekiel what he is to eat. God told Ezekiel he was to take several grains, wheat, barley, millet, and emmer, along with beans and lentils, and grind them together and make bread from it. 8-grain bread before it became popular. The combination of grains and beans would not produce good bread. It would produce actually very poor bread. And it had very little nutritional value.
Lentils are a high protein source.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it would have been,
Go ahead, Ann.
it would have been balanced protein, but not much else.
Right.
Yeah.
It'd have no vitamins or minerals, really, but it would have had protein.
What is emmer?
Well, there's a little debate about what that is. There's a couple things that it could be, but most Old Testament scholars believe it's something we don't have anymore. that it's a grain type of kind of like a wheat, but not really. Something that we don't know necessarily.
And it's really odd. You know what millet is used for today? We feed it to the birds.
Yeah.
Birdseed.
And cattle.
Bird
And
feed.
people who can't tolerate gluten.
They
Only
get all the
occasionally.
cardboard.
Even those of us who don't tolerate gluten aren't real excited about eating millet.
Yeah.
It's bird seed.
Millet sounds like bugs to me.
It's not. But if you ever think about the littlest, tiniest little dots in bird seed, that's millet.
I'm not a connoisseur of birdseed, so I don't know.
I have 4 fingers.
Rich, what? It said he was able to get up for a portion of the day.
Yep, we'll get there in verse 10.
Okay. So I'm just being very practical. I guess that's when he would go to the bathroom. But then how could he lay down and put cords on himself that he wouldn't get up? Or, I mean, did the cords go from head to toe or just like on the legs and torso? You could do that yourself.
Well, it doesn't necessarily say that he did it himself, just that he would be bound.
So,
Verse
so somebody was with him during this entire.
Or not,
Chapter-
God could do it. I'm sorry, go
Chapter
ahead.
4,
Or his
chapter
poor
4,
wife.
verse 8 says God would do it.
Yeah.
Verse 8.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or
I will tie you up. It's
I will
way
place
verse
cords
8
on you, yeah.
Starts.
Okay.
If
Good
God
job, Ann.
designated, his poor wife would have to do it because he's got a wife in this mess. I bet she was not happy either.
So the bread was to represent the poverty that the people remaining in Israel and Jerusalem would be facing during the captivity. You know, we were just talking about eating your babies. They would get very hungry. They would run out of food because they had no way to go outside of the wall without getting killed. And so he's eating this really poor bread that would represent this poor diet that those left in Israel and Jerusalem would be forced to eat. And
It
this was
says here, emmer wheat or hulled wheat is a type of wheat.
yeah.
So it's, okay. I just
Yeah.
looked it up.
Yeah, it's all very low in any kind of value, and it's kind of like what the Africans ate a lot of because it filled you up, but it didn't actually provide your body with anything.
Just kept you going. Yep. Okay.
And what they were going to go through, or what they were going through, was predicted by Moses in Deuteronomy hundreds of years before. Deuteronomy 28:49 through 57. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like eagles, a nation whose language you do not understand. A hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. It shall eat the offspring of your cattle and the fruit of your ground until you are destroyed. It shall not leave you grain, wine, or oil, the increase of your herds or the young of your flock, until they have caused you to perish. They shall besiege you in all your towns until the high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout your land. That's a very important little statement in the middle. The walls in which you trusted. And they shall besiege you in all your towns throughout all your land, which the Lord your God has given you. And you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you, in the siege and in the distress from which your enemies shall distress you. The man who is the most tender and refined among you will begrudge food to his brother, to the wife he embraces, and to the last of the children he has left. So he will not give to any of them any of the flesh of his children whom he is eating, because he has nothing else left. In the siege and in the distress from which your enemies shall distress you in all your towns. The most tender and refined woman among you, who would not venture to set the sole of her foot on the ground because she is so delicate and tender, will begrudge to the husband she embraces, to her son and to her daughter, her afterbirth that comes out from between her feet, and her children whom she bears, because lacking everything she will eat them secretly, in the siege and in the distress which your enemy shall distress you in your towns. That's just about as disgusting as it gets.
What were the verses out of Deuteronomy you just read?
Deuteronomy chapter 28, 49 through 57.
57.
Yeah.
Got it.
I just got home. I'm with you now.
Okay.
Bye, Chuck.
All right.
Hi,
I'm
Chuck.
brain eating dinner.
Okay.
After the passage I just read, are you sure you want to?
Yeah. Ooh. Ooh. That's a great.
Nasty. Okay, on to chapter Ezekiel 4:10. And your foot that you eat shall be by weight. Or I'm sorry, and the food, not foot. And the food you eat shall be by weight.
This cannibalism thing, huh?
20 shekels a day from the day that you shall eat it. And water you shall drink by measure. The sixth part of a hin from day to day you shall drink. And you shall eat it as barley cake, baking it in the sight on human dung. And the Lord said, thus shall people of Israel eat their bread unclean among the nations where I will drive them. So God,
You know that shekels is only 11 grams.
yeah, it's not much.
Like this. It's much.
You're
Just
talking
10 pounds.
the weight loss program before Marie Osmond started hawking it. God imposed limits on the amount of food he could eat each day. He was limited to about 10 ounces of food a day and about a pint of water each day. Ezekiel was living out a demonstration to the people of Israel about the results of being punished for sin. So think about this now. Here's this guy that God had conscripted to be his mouthpiece to the people. When he thought he was going to be a priest, he ends up being a prophet, and he only gets to talk when God tells him to talk, only gets to speak to the people when God tells him to speak, and he never has good news to say. And then God said, oh, by the way, you're also going to have to demonstrate this. So you're going to live on 10 ounces of poor bread and a pint of water a day.
For how long?
390 days.
days. And then
And
roll
then
over to
40.
his other side
40.
and for 40 days.
I still don't see where he
400.
gets up.
That's like 13 months the first time
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, and remember that the calendar then was 360 days, not 365.
We're looking at what we call 13 months. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus then the 40, so it's 14 months and 10 days.
Yeah.
That's yucky.
Rich, Elaine's question was where
Yeah,
does it say?
I'm looking where my notes took me, and I don't. I'll have to go on in the text to see it. I don't see it. I don't see it in the text, Elaine. I don't know. I put in the notes that we know from other verses in the section he was bound in verse 8. He was to eat little food, verses 9 through 17, and only for a portion of each day. He was to lay on his left. Maybe I just misinterpreted my own notes. That he wasn't to get up. But from what I remember, most scholars believe he was allowed up part of the time. I mean, obviously, you would have to be able to do that.
Oh, really? Yeah. Mercy.
Yeah, and then, unless that was really part of the yucky punishment.
Yeah.
Laying, it's been gross so far, but I mean,
Yeah, it's not getting any better, is it?
No.
Okay, go on to verse 12 and 13. And you shall eat it as a barley cake, baking it in their sight on human dung. And the Lord said, thus shall the people of Israel eat their bread unclean among the nations where I will drive them. It was common to use animal dung, dried animal dung, to make little fires on to cook your bread. That was common. It was not common to use human dung because it stinks differently. It stinks badly. Still hungry, Chuck? Elaine can go to the septic tank and grab you some dung to cook on your food on.
So they were using the dung as a platform?
They were using it as
fuel.
as the source of heat.
Fuel.
The fuel for the fire, yeah.
Fuel for the fire. Yeah.
Charcoal.
Just like the buffalo chips when they were traveling west, Brian.
Mm-hmm. But if
Cow
you're
patties.
saying that the human dung smells differently, then
Yes.
that's going to contaminate the bread even
Well,
more.
from a ritual purity standpoint, anytime you were in contact with dung, you became unclean.
Mhm.
But I'm just saying the smell of that smoke will get in the food.
Yes.
Oh
yes.
yeah.
It'd be no good. Of course, his bread wasn't going to be any good anyway.
Yeah, but it got worse.
Yes, it did.
At least it got baked or cooked a little bit or something.
Oh,
So-
yuck.
Look at the next set of verses, though.
Oh.
And then I said, oh, Lord God, behold, I've never defiled myself from my youth up until now. I have never eaten what died of itself or was torn by beast, nor has it tainted meat come into my mouth. Then he said to me, see, I assign to you cow's dung instead of human dung, on which you may prepare your food. So Ezekiel objected. He said, I've never done that. I don't want to do that. And so God allowed him to use a cow dung for fire.
Well, he was trained to be a priest, and so that was a pretty serious offense for a priest. So maybe God took pity on him and said, "Oh yeah, right."
Now imagine living in the Israelite camp of the wilderness wandering, because Levitical law required the outhouse to be outside of the camp.
The big camp.
It's a big camp because maybe 2-3 million, we don't know, maybe 6 million people left Egypt. So you put that many people with the tabernacle in the middle and then all the tribes around it. You had to go, if you had to go, and I mean like had to go, how did you get there without having an accident?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, ugly, huh?
And the older you got, the slower you got, and
Yeah,
the
buddy.
more faster you needed to be.
You had to really plan.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, the older you get, the less pucker is available.
oh.
They had
Still
3
want to
days
eat, Chuck?
to defense.
I'm
Yeah, this is
wondering
great
if,
for occupation.
I'm wondering if there was some provision made for chamber pots.
No, it had to be outside the camp, or you were ceremonially unclean. So we do know that some folks kept those facilities in their tents, but then had to get purified before they could go offer a sacrifice.
Well, that's what I kind of meant.
Which
They
meant,
had chamber pots and had to be made clean.
yeah, that would mean extra offerings and so forth. So really only the rich could do it.
So is that not akin to us in our age sinning for convenience to ask for forgiveness?
I think I would just camp
Does that make
outside.
Does that make sense, Rich, what I'm saying?
Yeah, because if I didn't want to have to try to get to the outside of the camp, And so I kept a porta-john in my tent, and knew that was a sin. So what you're asking is how do we put that into our context today?
Well, I mean, if you do that, you know it's sin, so you go to get ritually clean again, ceremonially clean again. To me, that would be very akin to us, for convenience sake, sinning, knowing that we could just go ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So it's a purposeful sin for that.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking how I'm like Elaine. My brain is going logic. You've got a baby in the diapers. You've got a 2-year-old that's trying to potty train, and they just pee pee on the desert sand while you're walking. You know?
I'm just voting that I camp outside the camp.
Yeah, too.
Probably the best idea.
Well, the older I get, the slower I go.
You like the suburbs, huh?
Yep, I think so.
I mean, I get the ceremonially unclean part, but honest to goodness, practically speaking, there had to be some issues.
Yeah, and there were lots of issues like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the priests were kept busy. You know, we always think that there's a high priest and a couple of priests. There were lots of priests because the priests had to check all those things. They had to check, are you circumcised or not? Is that wound healed or not? You still have pus draining or not? That was all the priests doing that stuff.
I mean, we potty trained Axton over the summer because he could just turn around and go pee pee in the grass.
Yeah, my in-laws taught the boys that behind the shrub was faster than going inside. We lived on a corner.
No,
Not good.
not good.
Okay, Rich, I'm gonna play our friend Butch here. And in verse 15, where it says, your cow's dung instead of human dung, it looks like God changed his mind.
No. How did God change his mind? You have to know what he was thinking, not what he said.
Well, I know it's all prepared ahead of time and God didn't, but that's how the script kind of comes across.
No, I don't think so.
I don't, yeah.
Just imagine that God knew that Ezekiel was going to complain and he was going to allow him to have cow dung. That's not changing his mind. From Ezekiel's perspective, it is, but not from God's perspective.
Right.
Just like when we pray for something. Are we praying to change God's mind? We think we are. We want God to do something that doesn't look like he's going to do. But in effect, what he's going to do is what he's going to do.
But it's never too late for God to do something. So in keeping praying, it's not necessarily changing his mind, but just rather badgering him for what you want.
Well, you can badger him all you want for what you want, but it doesn't change what will be.
Except, remember the proverb about the lady who went to the judge and she kept going till he said, I'll do it, just to shut her up.
Yeah, but our prayers don't change God. Our prayers change us. They change our attitudes. They change our opinions, but God doesn't change. Otherwise, he wouldn't be God.
A lot of times, I understood it would be a test as to whether you would continue to go to God or whether you take things in your own hands.
Yeah, sometimes it is a test.
And with that lady who went to the unjust judge, it was a test for her.
Okay, let's get the last verses of this section before we quit. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, behold, I will break the supply of bread in Jerusalem. They shall eat bread by weight and with anxiety, and they shall drink water by measure and in dismay. I will do this that they may lack bread and water and look at one another in dismay, and not because of their punishment. God,
And not because I think it says and rot away.
I'm sorry. And rot because of their punishment. I was just looking at my notes to make sure that I'd put the verse in right. And rot because of their punishment. God makes it clear to Ezekiel what the punishment will be like. Food will be in such short supply that it will be rationed as will water. We've already seen the prediction by Moses in Deuteronomy that the people will be resorting to eating each other as food, because as food becomes in short supply. Human excrement will be the only fuel for the fire, as all the animals will have been eaten and the wood will have already been burned. The punishment was real and it was hard. They had violated God and his character and refused to submit to God. The punishment was what was promised. Now remember, Ezekiel is in Babylon doing this, acting out this scenario of what it will be like, or what it is like, in Jerusalem. They have no animals to eat anymore because those were kept outside of the gates, and outside of the gates was the Babylonian army. So all they had was what was in the gates. And they only had water because Hezekiah built a tunnel and a water cistern. But Nebuchadnezzar got that stopped up pretty good, so there was just a trickle that ended up resulting in them. That's kind of like a redundant. That's the word. Wow.
Redundant. Yeah, okay.
So they ended up with just a little water going through the canal, and they didn't get much. So they ended up not having much. God told them, this is what's going to happen. The entire existence of Israel, in the land of Israel, and in the land of in the Levant, their entire existence, they knew this would happen. Moses told them it would happen. And God told them it would happen.
But it was going to happen to them in the foreign lands too, right?
No, it would happen because of
scattered ones.
It would happen because of an oppressor from a foreign land. And that's Nebuchadnezzar.
I thought it was not only north and south, but it would also affect the Jews that had been scattered. But
True.
It's only happening to the Jews in the north and south.
Yeah, what's really happening is what happens to Israel, and particularly now all that's left, all that Nebuchadnezzar has left to conquer is Jerusalem. Assyria took the 10 northern tribes, and then Assyria was conquered by Babylon, and then Babylon takes all the tribal lands around Jerusalem and just camps out in Jerusalem until everybody eats each other.
And you didn't like Job. Mm-hmm.
And I don't like Job, right? Well, I'm telling you, there's a lot of weirdness in Ezekiel. I like Genesis a whole lot more.
Past weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Questions? Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.